Generative AI. It's probably a term that you've heard more than your own name since November 2022, when OpenAI introduced ChatGPT to the world. Some of you may like it, some of you may hate it, but one thing is clear: you cannot ignore it. Thank you so much for joining us today on this panel. We're going to talk about the state of adoption of generative AI in pharmacovigilance specifically, and what the emerging picture looks like. Before we jump in, I'd like to introduce the panelists on our talk today. Let me start with Dr. Fatima Bayat. Dr. Fatima is currently an independent drug safety and PV consultant. Up until earlier this year, she was the Chief Safety Officer at Amgen. She's also held leadership positions at Takeda and AstraZeneca before she joined Amgen. Dr. Fatima completed her PhD in the epidemiology of leukemias from the University of Nottingham, and then went on to complete her MFPM and FFPM from the Royal College of Physicians, London. Welcome to the panel, Dr. Fatima.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here.
Thank you. Next, I'm going to introduce Anand Ramanathan. So Anand heads digital pharmacovigilance, and she is a digital CMO at Sanofi Digital R&D. Anand has been a lifer at Sanofi and has previously held other leadership positions, like being the global head of ITS pharmacovigilance. Anand completed his master's degree from Oklahoma State University and the leadership journey with Wharton Business School. Anand is also a certified project management professional. Welcome to the panel, Anand.
Thank you very much, Nikesh. Glad to be here and looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you. Finally, let me introduce Clapton Diaz. Clapton is a Senior Vice President of Global R&D Strategy at EMD Seroring. He's accountable for portfolio strategy and decision sciences, program management, and is responsible for the R&D hubs that EMD has in India, China, Japan, and Israel. Clapton has previously been part of UPMC, BioMarin, J&J, Amgen, and BMS, and did his PhD in pharmaceutical sciences from the University of Missouri, Kansas City. It's great to have you on the panel, Clapton.
Thank you, Nikesh, and looking forward to the discussion with my fellow panelists.
Thank you. Now, before we get started, I'd just like to point out that the views shared on this panel are the views of the panelists themselves and do not represent the position of the companies that they are part of at this point of time. Finally, let me introduce myself. I'm Nikesh, and I head the safety business at Indegene. And I'm delighted to have Anand, Clapton, and Fatima on this panel. Let's jump right in. So I'm gonna start with you, Anand. On our first and the most sort of pressing question, from your perspective, where do you see the state of adoption of generative AI in pharmacovigilance today?
Let me start off by saying Gen AI is absolutely fascinating field right now. And there are many applications across all industries, not just in R&D or in PV itself. And it's not just the generative AI that interests. All types of AI could be interesting to be leveraged, to be used across PV and other places. So specifically to PV, to go back to your question, there are many different use cases. The use cases could be as simple as creating a summary report to as complex as medical assessment. So there are many use cases that can be used. However, in my opinion, most of the companies are in the early stage of adoption in the PV, especially it being more regulatory, highly regulated area of the industry. So some of them are in the production too, but overall, the picture stands where we are all trying to leverage AI, and that is a great thing.
Okay, thank you. Anand, Fatima, your thoughts?
Yes, I think I would agree with that. I think most companies are on the journey already. It seems to me that most pilots are being used in cases where data that pre-exists, by that I include text data or data tables, are being reused in multiple documents. So, for example, within submission packages. So my sense is that most companies have started there, but certainly there are many opportunities in PV to use this, for example, in the generation of PSURs, DSURs, and even risk management plans. My sense is that the PV use cases has been incorporated into the second phase of these companies' adoption. But I think PV has many examples that easily lends themselves to the use of generative AI. Most organizations are in the pilot stages already. And again, as I said, most of them have been using submission dossiers for their pilots.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Clapton, I know you're responsible for R&D, not just for PV, but thoughts on PV, and then maybe even expand to where you see some of the adoption in R&D.
So, Nikesh, as Anand said, I think Gen AI has broad applications across different sectors, and even within R&D, you see a variety of different use cases with different levels of maturity. I think the PV side of things is emerging, as stated before. It's about moving into automated reporting. It's moving into predictions of signals relative to noise in terms of the data that can be mined to look for ADR detection. So that is something in the pilot phase. Relative to other areas of R&D, particularly in discovery, I would say PV is still a way to go. In terms of drug discovery, Gen AI is further along, especially around molecule creation in both the small molecule as well as large molecule world.
Interesting. And maybe I'll stay with you on the next question I have as well, Clapton. Do you see the state of adoption of generative AI different in large pharma versus mid pharma versus small pharma? In a sense, does size really matter from an adoption perspective?
Yeah, I think size does matter, because ultimately these technologies and these solutions require investments, and they require a thought process that is associated with the size of the portfolio, as well as the ability of the company to invest in this. So in many cases, you see that the large pharmaceutical companies are pioneering on this front, and it's associated with the fact that they have deeper pockets, as well as have the ability to collaborate with companies that are in this space. When you think about smaller companies, it boils down to specific use cases where they might leverage generative AI approaches. And then there are other companies that are AI focused. So I have to say that the companies that are AI focused, they are trying to build solutions. And so those are completely AI companies.
Got it. Anand, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, in addition to the actual size of the pharma, there is also a combination of factors. The actual value that use case will generate for them. Some pharma may have large volume, some pharma may have small volume for repetitive tasks. For example, if we take that as a use case, so there is a different value that each of these can generate out of it. In addition to it, there are pharma that want to modernize, want to innovate. What is that urge for them to modernize and innovate? So that is also goes into factor. And finally, I also feel the risk tolerance. How much can I tolerate risk? From each of us may have different risk tolerance. So that also probably goes into the picture. Whichever adoption rate we are, I think for AI being new technology and stuff, we have to make sure we have oversight and governance frameworks in place for the AI adoption itself.
No, I think it makes a lot of sense. And Fatima, while you throw some light onto that as well, maybe you also want to talk about for organizations that have progressed more than some other organizations, what are some of the factors you feel have helped them progress faster than the others?
Yeah, sure. So a couple of things to add. It's clear that companies with larger portfolios have the most to gain, because this enables multiple projects to be advanced simultaneously, which won't have been possible otherwise, either with increasing internal resource or externalizing some of the work. And then in terms of the company size, there is an advantage to even small biotech adopting generative AI. If we think about the fact that these companies often have very small numbers of in-house staff, and we could see immediately that even if they had one asset, but it's coming up to submission, that it's a value to use generative AI in pulling their submission together, just because it reduces the number of members of staff one needs. So I think that's an advantage for even very small biotech. In my experience, I think the single most important factor that has contributed to companies advancing this adoption has really been the attitude technology, not just of the PV leadership, but also the IT organization and the wider R&D organization in these companies. And I think safety leaders' ability and the opportunity to influence the heads of IT and the heads of R&D has had a critical impact on progress. And we can immediately recognize that the visibility of these leaders within pharma companies vary quite a bit. And this is highly dependent on the organizational structure and reporting lines. But really, it's the senior sponsorship that determines and drives the prioritization, both of giving the topic airtime within the company, but also funding towards the adoption of generative AI. And this role in advocacy, incentivizing and promotion within the individual safety department, but also the wider R&D organization, really, I think, has been the single most important factor in driving progress.
Yeah, I agree. I think leadership, senior level sponsorship plays a critical role in advancing not just generative AI, but any new initiative in any organization. And then your thoughts on some of these?
Yeah, it's really good that all organizations are trying out this innovation and Gen AI and all AI in general. So the industrialization of the use case comes down to outcomes. So when we start pilots, we have outcomes in each phase of our project, our initiative. So when those pilot gives out outcomes and values, the mindset changes to say, yes, we can proceed to the next stage and make it bigger and better and all that stuff. So that's what is happening right now, even in regulated space, where we can prove that AI or Gen AI works and then go to the next stage, even if it is GXP, even if it is highly regulated. And the complexity of the use case for PV, just summarization of a report, simple report, transactional report versus medical assessment. That's a big difference in complexity. So that also comes into picture on when we can move to the next stage of utilization of Gen AI and AI.
Got it. Lappin, any other points you'd like to add in terms of how organizations have facilitated adoption?
Yeah, sure. I think building on what was mentioned earlier in terms of leadership, the point I wanted to emphasize more was around the fear that you talked about, Nikesh, or the hate sometimes even, and people wonder what's AI going to do to their jobs. It's important that leadership brings the right mindset. And if you have that mindset and cultural view of how this is more of an assistant technology rather than replacing someone, that's the first thing. And if you have adoption at the team level, at the individual member level in a company, I think there is going to be an appetite to explore new technologies. The second point was around the budgets and the ability to invest, of course. If you have the ability to invest and explore new technologies, then yes. There are technologies that are more mature than others. So the decision to build versus buy, the value capture that Anand had mentioned earlier in a previous response, I think these are all elements that drive adoption of these technologies.
No, I agree. I think great points. Obviously, on the other side, there are still concerns, right? It's not all roses and sunshine. Where I think there's still some concerns around the adoption of Gen AI. Where would Fatima, you think some of the main concerns lie?
So I think traditionally PV folk have been quite conservative, if I can say that. And so I think the accuracy of the content produced by generative AI is the first thing that comes to mind. And then the ability to efficiently and effectively check the accuracy of that content, I think, is key. And the other main factor would be the acceptability of AI generated content to health authorities. And I think this is something that industry is learning in parallel with our regulatory agencies. So I think we're learning together. And so I think it's really important that companies keep in close communication with regulators so that we are all heading in the same direction. And then the other factors, which I think has been alluded to, is the cost of implementing and then maintaining these solutions. And people sometimes talk about the time taken to implement might mean that by the time a company has implemented a solution, the technology will advance so much, because it is advancing really quickly. I think we can all agree, so that you end up making the solution that has been chosen obsolete already. And I think that does play on people's mind, particularly given the cost of these solutions. And then the other factor is developing in-house solutions versus buying in the technology that has already been tried and tested. And then finally, return on investment, right? How do we demonstrate that to the budget holders, I think is one of the challenges that are faced as well.
Yeah, so I think you raised a bunch of really great points. I think we'll come back to the ROI point. We'll come back to what do you do in-house versus outsource. But love to hear, Clapton, any other concerns you've seen which still organizations are grappling with?
I think sensibility to data and having the right amount of data privacy aspects, and just to hit upon that point, that's an element. And then integration into existing processes and systems. And it goes back to the value question. However, in exploring new technologies, you're now creating maybe two operating models. And so how do you balance that exploration with business continuity? And I think that's a challenge that people face. Of course, if you have in-house data scientists and an in-house team, I think it's easier. If you're working with a vendor or partner technology company, then that's a bit more of a challenge to try and bring someone that's a third party on board. So those are some real operational aspects that get in the way of the adoption also.
Yeah. Anand, while I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but I understand you've had some experience on working with health authorities in this areas as well, especially to try and resolve some of the black box challenges that AI presents, right?
Yeah, so to add to a couple of things first on what Clapton and Fatima said, the consistency of the output goes into a big factor of concern, and also the defendability of that output itself. Especially in a highly regulated environment such as PV, when AI runs something, there is a level of black box that's there. There is nothing we can do. It's there. And the hallucinations that it's going to create. Can we be sure every time we prompt GenAI to write something or do something, it is going to do exact same output every time? It's probably not going to do it this time, but it's evolving. It's going to do it eventually. That's why it's really important to have this strong oversight and governance. And Clapton talked about how we integrate that governance and oversight with the overall operating model too. So it's a combination. We don't want it to be too siloed activities going. So that is a concern there. To going back to black box itself and hallucinations. So one of the things we have been doing is active engagement of all stakeholders and transparency of information. So there is going to be mistakes. There is going to be issues. We share the mistakes and issues openly, transparently to all the stakeholders involved. And we have had these engagements with health authorities to share our outcome of what we have done, and they provided input. And I think Fatima mentioned, everybody is learning. Everybody is just going on this journey, and nobody is an expert. So it's relatively new field. And it's good for us all to leverage. For example, FDA recently opened up the EDSTP, which is the Emerging Drug Safety Technology Meetings and Programs. So they opened that up. I think other authorities may open something similar. So it's really useful for us to engage in this forum so that not only are we getting better and in this engagement, but making AI and Gen AI better as a overall. So transparency and engagement removes that stigma of black box a little bit.
No, absolutely. And I think all the health authorities are grappling with this, as much as, most of the pharma companies, most of us providers are. We do see time and again some amount of guidelines, some amount of guidance coming through. Hopefully it will be a situation where industry as well as regulatory authorities kind of collaborate and come up with guidelines that work for everyone. Let me move on to another question. I think we touched upon some of that earlier, but I think Anand, you mentioned some areas, but more specifically within PV, what are some of the areas that lend themselves faster towards the adoption of generative AI versus areas that might take a little bit more time as the technology matures?
Yeah, there are many areas in pharmacovigilance. I think Fatima also touched on some of those before, whether it's in case management of adverse events, signal management, or risk management. So all areas can use this. The only difference is the complexity in each of those areas, the use cases that we pick up. For example, narrative writing or an operational or transactional reporting, something it's relatively, I wouldn't say simple, but relatively usable for Gen AI with proper oversight and governance to ensure we go through the process. However, if we take a little bit more complex use case where we are having to generate large tables and for periodic reporting and or for safety evaluation reports or medical assessments or signal assessments, those are more complex and more in-depth work is required, and it will take longer. Doesn't mean AI cannot do it. It just takes longer for us to get comfortable with that whole process. And then the last part, I do want to stick this in, which is we don't always have to do AI just because.
Mm-hmm.
AI is not the solution for every problem, in my opinion. Sometimes the simple business logic will work fine and be very efficient. And as long as it's well integrated into the overall ecosystem of the R&D, for example, for PV, speaking of PV, and across the company, then it should still work. So AI does not have to be the solution for every problem. But the way we are going, it's good for AI to be one of the solutions that we are reviewing for every problem. So we can differentiate and help AI better and us also getting better in the process.
No, I agree. I think horses for courses. Fatima, your thoughts on this?
I think to add to the list, I would, literature reviews for signal evaluations, I think is incredibly time consuming. And I think generative AI has a big role to play there. And again, it's, people need to have the confidence that it is accurate and that the content is dependable. And then the other item I'd add is ICF generation. We've talked about PSURs, GSURs, and RMPs already, but the generation of ICFs and other aspects of the drug development process, also represent opportunities for generative AI.
Sure. And Clapton, while you can add to the PV use cases, but feel free to sort of broaden it and say, okay, what are the other areas within R&D that lend themselves to adoption?
Well, my colleagues have already touched on the PV aspects. I think when you do PV studies, there's a goldmine of data. It's real world data. You get a lot of information that's coming through from a variety of different studies. As an R&D scientist myself, I think of that as a goldmine to understand epidemiology, to understand disease progression, to understand standard of care, to understand the positioning of your molecules even. So there's a lot of applications that go above and beyond PV in my mind, where these data can be very useful. And more, the question comes around, which patient setting might respond to a given mechanism, or which mechanism may be more appropriate in a given patient setting, considering the standard of care, considering the disease progression. So I think these are areas that are worth further exploring, and companies are moving in that direction to integrate real-world data with clinical trial data to understand the benefit-risk equation even more.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. I think that let's come back to a point that was raised earlier around ROI. Right? Obviously, and I think Anand spoke about value generation. Maybe Clapton, you can go first on this one. How can organizations demonstrate ROI from Gen AI pilots and particularly address challenges in scaling, right? Because I think from a proof of concept, from a pilot perspective, I think we're getting there. But how does one demonstrate ROI from a scale perspective and pushing it into production?
It's a challenging question that everybody's facing today, right? I this hits upon the governance structure and how do you make these decisions? I think you start with the low-hanging fruit. Generative AI, in the case of a report that you're automating, for example, is going to replace or expedite a process. So the question becomes, how well do you understand and characterize your process today? And relative to that, where's the value going to be generated through generative AI? So you can start at a very small scale, and that's usually how you start to understand what's the applicability of that technology. And as Fatima also mentioned, as these solutions also come up and renew themselves pretty quickly and evolve pretty quickly, you want to keep abreast with that. You start with the pilots, and then you start to ask yourself whether it's time to scale up based on what's the repeatability of that process. For example, in the case of a process expeditious process application. So that's one way of looking at value. Of course, there are other ways of looking at value from an R&D perspective. There are so many other levers to pull on, like cost, like your probability of success, and how you start to get better informed and knowledgeable about the R&D process in general.
Yeah, no, fair points. Anand, any thoughts you'd like to share?
Yes, it all comes down to consistency of the output, ROI. So if we are not able to consistently generate that output, then the ROI is lost, because more people are going to keep reviewing the data and keep correcting the data, the output of the AI itself. Mm-hmm. So that's where the oversight is important, and risk management comes into play there as well. But at the same time, we have to try AI. We have to try AI. AI will be the norm. Like, the advanced technologies such as AI and its evolution are going to be the norm. So if we just leave it and wait, then it's moving and you're going to be sitting back, and it's going to get advanced and you're too late. So we have to try out, we have to help AI and make AI also help us. So it's a two-way street there as well, so that we can all move together and reach where we want to be and make the technology work better and also be comfortable with that technology. So I think Clapton alluded to this a little bit before. In this new era, in my opinion, humans with AI, working with AI, would be better, create better outcomes than humans without working with AI. So it's a new norm. So we just have to work with it.
Yeah. No, I think you touched upon an important point that should also be part of the ROI computation, which is that initially you are going to spend a lot more time reviewing the output till you build trust, till the teams that are going to work with AI build trust. So it's better to factor that in rather than realizing that, hey, we didn't anticipate that we would need to review a lot more of this, because it's going to be a little bit of an upward swing first before the efficiencies and the benefits are going to get realized. Yeah, makes sense. Fatima, any other thoughts that you'd like to add?
I guess the only other thing I would add to the time saving and the cost saving that we discussed was the recognition that actually will reduce the time taken to make decisions. So whether it's a filing decision or whether it's a decision on what action we need to take following a signal evaluation. And I think that's perhaps harder to demonstrate, because as someone mentioned before, you need to show the benefit, before versus after. So there needs to be some comparison, and it's a bit more complex and nuanced when it comes to making decisions. But I think it's an important point, and I think it's important to R&D leaders. They are very much motivated by faster decision making to move the portfolio along. So I think that's key. And then I guess with respect to the challenges of scaling, I think probably from my perspective, the single most important thing is the proactive change management, right? This needs to be fully resourced and it needs to be prioritized. Because even if you select the best technology in the world and you have the appropriate IT support, if you don't bring people along, it won't work. And so I think there needs to be detailed planning of communication across departments, and the communication needs to be adjusted for the specific audience because people will have different perspectives. And then I think, as most companies would expect to do, is phased implementation across the portfolio. I think those are the key challenges with scaling.
Okay. Now, before we go forward, there are a lot of questions coming in from the audience. Maybe we'll take a few, and some of it we've touched upon a little bit. But maybe, Clapton, I'll take one, and if you could address that. So you touched a little bit about, using in-house resources versus, external partners. In general, how do you see organizations staffing, Gen AI initiatives? Is it a mix of in-house, external? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, in my view, I think the best model is that hybrid model of having a critical mass of in-house experts working with external experts. It's such a vast field, and as Fatima mentioned earlier, technology is fast evolving. So trying to build it on your own is never a good idea because it'll be obsolete by the time you implement it. At the same time, you need to work with your own operational systems, your own operating model, and see how best it integrates and what's fit for purpose, while understanding the science and technology aspects that are associated with these. So starting with a core mass of individuals that can help explore and build what's real versus hype, as they say, and evaluate both external as well as internal solutions is probably the best way to go. Also, when you have an internal team working on things, you can actually try to demonstrate that early value capture or early value statement along the journey of building that technology. So you can then start to create that mindset, hopefully, where others around will say, okay, this is going to help me get more efficient. This is going to help me make a better choice. And it's really, really something that I want to do so that I can get that next medicine quickly to the patient as fast as possible. So,
sure. And let me just build on that a little bit, maybe peel the onion a little bit more. So yeah, I agree that, from a perspective, hybrid works well, but are there areas or are there things that, organizations like to keep in-house, and maybe the proof of concept or the pilots are done in-house, whereas when it comes to scaling, that an organization tries to look at external vendors? Any thoughts on that, Captain?
I think, if it's a custom solution, of course, that doesn't exist outside, or you are generating IP out of that solution, you'd want to develop it internally. In my view, it's usually, it boils down to what level of proprietary information you're dealing with. However, even working with third-party now companies, there's the ability to firewall your data. So there's the ability to ensure confidentiality of your data. I think reinventing the wheel on a solution that someone has already developed is probably not a good idea, or use of internal resources.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. Let me take another one from the audience. Does the quality of in-house data and how it is organized play an equally important part even now, right? When we're using large language models that have been trained on, billions and trillions of parameters, how important is in-house data and how it's organized? Anand, do you want to take a shot at that one?
Yeah. So I can take that data shot. One thing I do want to reiterate before going to the data shot is one of the things we cannot forget is the skills part. So I think Clapton said technology is evolving so fast. Skills are not evolving as fast as the technology itself. So there is going to be that learning curve. We have to invest and learn. That also helps in making the decision itself. So coming to data quality itself, in-house data, I'm going to say maybe something controversial. Data is something everyone wants. Absolutely, everyone wants it, but no one wants to own it. So there is a problem that we are trying to bridge there, where we need to ensure we have ownership of data itself for that. So I equate Gen AI as a whole to a baby, or in its infant stage. Baby needs to learn, needs to grow. needs to know the rights and wrongs, and we don't know what the right and wrong is for that baby, because every one of us have opinions. Every one of people have opinions itself. So we need to be careful how the baby learns, the ethics part of it, how it can understand bias, how it can differentiate hallucinations versus right, and how it should not just spit out information, or in this case, misinformation. So to me, in order for this to work well, for the baby to learn properly, the Gen AI and AI models to learn properly, is data. So data is a key parameter. And to be very specific, quality data is the foundation for any type of AI to actually function and learn better and go well. And I'll also say this is a catch-22 or maybe a two-way street, because we can use AI to identify discrepancies in data.
Mm-hmm.
And we can use data to help AI grow better. So it's a two-way street for AI and data. So AI needs data, data needs AI also to make each of them better. So when it comes to this picture, we cannot make it one-sided. So if that happens, then it's going to get into a bias situation. It's going to create issues with diversity. It's going to create issues with ethics part of the stuff. So in addition to this data, we have to have frameworks in place to have ethics, diversity, and also proper governance, so that the AI can actually function the way we want it to function.
Yeah, no, some great thoughts. It is a two-way street. Yeah, AI is great at pattern recognition, and hence, identifying errors or gaps in data could be a great use of AI itself, right? And vice versa. Let me take one other question, which I think is a really, really important one, which is how are organizations looking at reskilling their staff to work with one is Gen AI itself and experimenting, but as a domain expert or a subject matter expert, how are organizations looking at reskilling staff to work with Gen AI driven outputs? Fatima, thoughts on that?
So I think it would probably need to be, and I think it is, a very much a hybrid approach. I think upskilling, as we mentioned before, our existing staff is key, but there's also, huge benefit in bringing in staff with specialist skills in generative AI and so on. So, and we've seen it for a number of years now. Among hiring managers, bringing in people with those more technological skills, but also interest and enthusiasm. And I think that's important as we go on this journey together. There needs to be cross-training, as it were, of people with PV knowledge, traditional PV knowledge, with those with more technological skills and interest.
Yeah. I think great points, right? It is going to be a little bit of a process of change, maybe even a little bit of a phase of insecurity that PV professionals, or for that matter, anybody might go through. But I think all of you touched upon this earlier, that it's human with AI, and it's not going to be AI replacing humans, at least anytime soon. Let me take one additional question. I think we probably have time for one more, which is, and I think we touched upon this earlier, about this is not just a one team or a one department initiative, right? This cuts across different parts of the organization, whether it's IT, it's business, whether it's finance, right? It's internal audit, etc. So how does one manage this? How are organizations looking to? Are there organization structural changes that you guys are seeing within organizations to really tap and harness the power of this? Maybe I'll start with you, Clapton, first.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my observation, there are some organizations that have set up data and AI offices for this very purpose. And then there are some that are working primarily in partnership with their information technology colleagues, depending on the company. More importantly, I think it goes back to decision making and how do you decide where to go and where to explore. And this requires a matrix culture, matrix team for all the functions that you mentioned, Nikesh. And so that also looks to then understand how this integrates with the overall business model for the company, right? So we're talking about pharmaceutical R&D here, and to me, it's important that one understands their operating model and then pulling on those levers of both business-related benefits as well as economic or even upskilling people from a people capability perspective. You can then start to ask the question of what's our priority. And I think that's how I see organizations at least working together. Some have more specific departments around this that drive these initiatives. Some are more of a collaboration model.
Got it. Anand, anything else that you've seen, any other structure that you think has worked well?
I think there are different hybrids of structures going on, including hub and scope model, as well as the centralized models for Gen AI board and so on and so forth to govern the overall prioritization and guidance and status, etc. But either one could work depending on the organization, depending on where you structure. I don't know if there is complete organization changes personally, but I think it's in the beginning stage, but eventually it may get into that area. But different models can be tried, whichever works for the organization. I think we keep that and move forward.
Sure. Any other thoughts, Fatima?
Yeah, I agree. It's very much cross-functional and has to be suited to a specific organization. I completely agree with that. Yeah.
Okay. So I think we are up on time, and I really enjoyed having this chat with you, Anand, Clapton, Fatima. I'm sure the audience did as well. I think there were some fantastic questions. I'd also like to thank our listeners for joining in to this very exciting and topic, as well as something that we're all learning and trying to sort of figure out the way into the future on. So thank you so much, and hope you have a good rest of the evening.
Thank you, Nikesh.
Thank you.
Thank you.